We sold your villa, Clara. Sophie was in trouble and you wouldn't help. So we did it for you, my father said over the phone, as if he'd just sold a used car. I didn't scream. I just said, okay, and hung up, because I knew something they didn't. The family lawyer was scheduled to call them in 1 hour, and the forged signature they'd used wasn't just a crime. It was the detonator for a legal trap I had set years ago. Before we go on, hit like, make sure to subscribe, and tell me, justice or cruelty? Which side are you on? Let me back up and explain how I got here. My name is Clara Hartwell, and I'm a corporate lawyer specializing in estate planning and contract law. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent the last 7 years building a career that I'm genuinely proud of. I make a comfortable living well into 6 figures. I own a beautiful seaside villa that sits on 3 acres of pristine coastline. By all outside accounts, I've built a successful, stable life. But none of that matters to my family. To them, I've always been just one thing: the reliable one, the fixer, the person who cleans up messes, the daughter who has her life together, which apparently means I exist solely as a resource to be plundered when things go wrong. And in my family, things go wrong constantly. My grandmother was the smartest, most capable woman I ever knew. Her name was Eleanor Hartwell, and she was a force of nature. She came from absolutely nothing. Her parents were factory workers who barely scraped by. She grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 siblings, wearing hand-me-down clothes and eating meals that were more filler than substance. But she was sharp, ambitious, and she refused to accept that poverty was her destiny. She started working at 15, lying about her age to get a job at a local diner. She saved every penny. When she was 19, she bought her first property, a rundown duplex in a bad neighborhood. She fixed it up herself, learning plumbing and carpentry from library books. She rented out both units and used that income to buy another property. By the time she was 40, she owned 37 rental properties across 3 cities. By the time she was 60, she'd transitioned into commercial real estate and had accumulated a portfolio worth tens of millions. When she died at 91, her estate was valued at just over $40 million. She was brilliant. She was careful. And she knew exactly what money could do to people. She knew her children, my father Richard and my Aunt Diane, were not like her. They'd grown up comfortable, never experiencing the hunger and fear that had driven her. They were soft. They were weak. My father went to college and got a degree in business, but never actually built a business. He worked middle management jobs and complained about his bosses. He married my mother, Janet, who was a sweet woman, but had absolutely no backbone. Together, they lived reasonably well, but never accumulated real wealth of their own. My grandmother watched them carefully. She watched how they handled money, how they made decisions, how they raised their children. And she saw problems. The biggest problem was my sister, Sophie. Sophie is 3 years younger than me. She came into the world with advantages I never had. She was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that makes people stop and stare. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a smile that could light up a room. She was charming and funny and magnetic. People loved her instantly. My parents worshipped her. From the time Sophie was little, she got away with everything. If she threw a tantrum in a store, my parents would buy her whatever she wanted to make her stop. If she failed a test at school, they'd blame the teacher. If she got in a fight with a friend, the other kid was always the problem. She learned early that bad behavior had no lasting consequences, that someone would always swoop in to save her. I watched this happen in real time. When Sophie was 16, she stole my mother's credit card and went on a shopping spree. $8,000 in clothes, shoes, and accessories in a single weekend. When my mother discovered it, she cried. My father was angry for about an hour. Then they paid off the card and told Sophie she just needed to be more careful with money. No punishment, no consequences, just a gentle reminder to be more responsible. When Sophie was 19 and in college, she crashed my father's car. She'd been drinking at a party, decided to drive anyway, and wrapped the car around a telephone pole. She walked away with minor bruises. The car was totaled. My father's insurance rates skyrocketed, but my parents told everyone it was just an accident. Bad luck, could have happened to anyone. They bought Sophie a new car within a month. I saw the pattern forming. I saw my sister learning that the world would always catch her when she fell. And I saw my parents building that world for her, one rescue at a time. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one. I got good grades without drama. I worked part-time jobs in high school and saved my money. I got scholarships for college. I studied hard, got into a good law school, and graduated near the top of my class. My parents were proud of me, I suppose, but in a distant, abstract way. I wasn't exciting. I didn't need them. So I didn't get much attention. That was fine with me. I preferred being underestimated. My grandmother, however, was paying close attention. She saw everything I saw, and more. She called me when I was 24, near the end of my second year of law school. She asked me to come visit her. It wasn't a casual invitation. Her voice had that serious tone that meant this was important. I drove to her house, a beautiful Tudor-style home in an old money neighborhood. She made tea and we sat in her sunroom surrounded by plants and afternoon light. She asked me about school, about my career plans, about my life. Then she got to the real reason she'd called me. "Clara, I'm going to die soon," she said, matter of fact. "Not tomorrow, probably not this year, but soon. And before I do, I need to make sure my money goes to the right place." I started to protest, to say she was healthy and would live for years. But she held up her hand. "Don't be sentimental. I'm 90 years old. I've had a good run. Now listen, I've set up a family trust for my assets. Everything will go into it. Your father and mother will be beneficiaries. Sophie will be a beneficiary. You'll be a beneficiary. But someone needs to manage it, and it can't be your father." "Why not?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Because he's weak, and he'll let Sophie destroy everything I built. She's got problems, Clara. I know you've seen it. The stealing, the lying, the recklessness. It's going to get worse, and your parents are going to enable it until there's nothing left." I nodded slowly. "What are you asking me to do?" "I want you to be the trustee. You'll manage everything. You'll make sure the money lasts, that it's invested wisely, that everyone gets their fair share. But you'll also protect it from stupidity and addiction and weakness. Can you do that?" I was 24 years old, still in law school, and she was asking me to manage $40 million and navigate my family's dysfunction. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt right. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." She smiled. "Good. I'll have the paperwork drawn up. You'll take over as trustee when you turn 25. We spent the next several hours going over her wishes, her vision, her concerns. She was meticulous. She'd thought through every detail. The trust would own all the major assets. The family home where my parents lived, the vacation property in Vermont, various investment properties, a diversified stock portfolio. The beneficiaries would receive generous monthly stipends, but wouldn't have direct access to the principal. My father would get $50,000 a month. My mother would get $50,000 a month. Sophie would get $25,000. I would get $25,000. The stipends were more than generous. They were life-changing amounts for most people. But my grandmother had one more gift for me, separate from the trust. "I'm giving you the beach house," she said. "It's going to be in your name only, completely outside the trust. It's yours. They can't touch it. can't claim it, can't make demands on it. You're gonna need a place to escape, Clara, a sanctuary. When they come calling, and they will, somewhere that's just yours. The beach house, my villa, was a 2-bedroom cottage on 3 acres of pristine coastline, about 2 hours from the city. It wasn't a mansion, but the location made it valuable, easily worth $2 million. She had the deed transferred to me as a graduation gift when I finished law school a year later. True to her word, my grandmother had all the legal documents prepared. The family trust was established with me as trustee. My parents signed all the paperwork. I don't think they read it very carefully. They were just excited about the money, about the security, about never having to worry about finances again. My grandmother died 2 years later, peacefully in her sleep. She'd lived to see me pass the bar exam and start my career. She'd lived to see the trust activated and functioning. She'd lived long enough to know her legacy was in capable hands. The funeral was large. She'd touched a lot of lives, built a lot of buildings, employed a lot of people. My father gave a eulogy about what a strong, inspiring woman she'd been. My mother cried. Sophie looked bored. I sat quietly and felt the weight of responsibility settle onto my shoulders. After the funeral, life continued. The trust functioned exactly as designed. My parents received their $100,000 a month combined. Sophie got her $25,000. I got mine as well, though I was also working full-time at a law firm, so the stipend was extra income I mostly saved. My parents were thrilled. They'd never had that kind of money before. They bought new cars, took vacations, redecorated their house. They lived like lottery winners, which, in a sense, they were. Sophie, on the other hand, burned through her money as fast as it came in. At first, it was shopping. She was 21 when Grandma died, still young and immature. She'd blow her entire monthly stipend on clothes, bags, shoes, jewelry. By the end of every month, she'd be calling my parents for loans to cover rent and groceries. They'd send her money from their own stipends without question. Then, the shopping evolved into partying. Sophie moved to the city, got an apartment she couldn't actually afford on her own, and threw herself into nightlife. Expensive clubs, bottle service, drugs. She wasn't working. Why would she? She had $25,000 a month for doing nothing. Then came the gambling. I'm not sure when it started exactly. Sophie was always secretive about the things she knew people would judge. But I started noticing changes. She'd mention going to casinos with friends. Then she'd mention going alone. Then she started talking about winning, about hitting jackpots, about her lucky nights. What she didn't talk about were the losses, but I could see them in her behavior. She'd be manic and generous after a win, buying drinks for everyone, picking up dinner tabs, bragging about her success. Then she'd disappear for weeks, not returning calls, avoiding family events. Those were the losing streaks. I watched this pattern develop over 3 years. By the time Sophie was 25, she was going to casinos 3 or 4 times a week. She'd discovered online gambling sites, sports betting, poker. The addiction had fully taken hold. I tried to talk to my parents. I was 28 at the time, well established in my career, living full-time in my villa and commuting to my office. I drove to their house and sat them down in their living room. Sophie has a gambling problem, I said. It's serious. She needs professional help. My father's face went red. That's ridiculous. She goes out and has fun sometimes. So what? It's not fun, Dad. It's an addiction. She's spending all her money. She's borrowing from you constantly. She's lying about where she goes and what she does. These are all classic signs. My mother shook her head. Sophie is just going through a phase. She's young. She's figuring things out. She's 25 years old and has no job, no savings, and a compulsive gambling habit. That's not a phase. That's a crisis. My father stood up. You've always been hard on your sister, always judging her, Always looking down on her because she's not as serious as you? Maybe if you supported her instead of criticizing her, she'd be doing better. I stared at him. I'm trying to support her by getting her help before she destroys her life. She doesn't need help, my mother said. She needs family who believe in her. I left that conversation knowing they were lost. They couldn't see the truth because they didn't want to see it. Admitting Sophie had a serious problem would mean admitting they'd failed her. So, they chose denial. That was the moment I knew for certain that when the real crisis came, they would sacrifice me to save her. I went home and started planning. I spent months researching. I read everything I could about trusts, about asset protection, about family law. I consulted with other attorneys, experts in estate planning and trust administration. I studied corporate poison pill provisions, the mechanisms companies use to prevent hostile takeovers, and I realized I could adapt those same mechanisms to protect the family trust. I flew back to see my grandmother. She was 89 at the time, still living independently, still sharp and clear-minded. I laid out everything I'd observed about Sophie. I showed her the patterns, the warning signs, the trajectory. I explained my fears about what was coming. Then I told her my plan. I want to amend the trust, I said. I want to add a clause that protects it from internal threats, not just external ones. If anyone in the family commits a serious financial crime against another family member, they lose their status as a beneficiary. All their shares get forfeited. Grandma listened carefully. What happens to the forfeited shares? That's the key part. They don't go to the other beneficiaries. If they did, there'd be incentive for people to turn on each other. Instead, the forfeited shares get liquidated and donated to charity. A specific charity named in advance. Which charity? I smiled. The National Center for Problem Gambling. My grandmother was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, a sharp bark of appreciation. That's brilliant and cruel, and exactly the kind of consequence they need to face. So I can do it. Absolutely, set it up, make it ironclad. And Clara, don't tell them what it means. Bury it in legal language. Let them sign it without understanding it. When the time comes, and it will come, they need to understand that actions have consequences. I hired the best trust attorney I could find, a man named Jonathan Myers who specialized in complex estate planning. I explained what I wanted. He drafted an amendment to the trust bylaws, 20 pages of dense legal language. The key section, the bad actor forfeiture clause, was buried in the middle, couched in terminology that sounded routine. The clause stated that any beneficiary who committed a felony-level financial crime against another beneficiary would have their status immediately and irrevocably terminated. The specific crimes listed included fraud, identity theft, forgery, and illegal appropriation or sale of another beneficiary's assets. The forfeited shares would be liquidated within 90 days and donated in full to the National Center for Problem Gambling. No exceptions, no appeals, no mercy. We presented the amendment to my parents as routine maintenance, updates required because of changing tax laws and new regulations. It was 2019. My grandmother signed it first. Then my parents signed it. They didn't read it carefully. They never did. They trusted that it was boring legal stuff that didn't really affect them. The trap was set. My grandmother died 6 months later. She went peacefully in her sleep, exactly the way she'd wanted. I was grateful she'd lived long enough to see this final protection put in place. Life continued. The trust operated normally. My parents and Sophie kept receiving their stipends. Nothing changed on the surface. But Sophie kept gambling, and it kept getting worse. By the time she was 28, Sophie had maxed out every credit card she could get. She'd borrowed money from friends and never paid it back. She'd lost friendships, relationships, and semblance of stability. The $25,000 a month wasn't enough anymore. Not even close. She started asking me for money. The first time she called me and asked for $10,000. She said she had an emergency, unexpected medical bills. I checked. There were no medical bills. I said no. The second time, she asked for $20,000. She said she was starting a business and needed capital. I knew she had no business plan and no intention of starting a company. I said no. The third time, she came to meet me for lunch near my office. She looked terrible. She'd lost weight, her skin was pale, her eyes had dark circles. She ordered a salad and didn't eat it. Then she asked me for $50,000. I made some bad investments, she said. I need help getting back on my feet. I'll pay you back in 6 months. I promise. You mean you lost at gambling? I said. Her face hardened. That's not fair. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Sophie. You're at the casino constantly. You've been gambling for years. You're addicted and you need help. She stood up, her voice rising. I knew you'd be like this. You've always been jealous of me. You've always wanted to see me fail. I want to see you get help. Check into a treatment program and I'll pay for all of it. Every single cent. The best facility in the country. But I will not give you cash to gamble away. She left without another word. She didn't speak to me for 8 months after that. My parents called me that same night. They said I'd been cruel and heartless. They said Sophie had come to me in genuine need, and I'd humiliated her. They said I was a terrible sister. I tried to explain that giving her money was enabling her addiction, that real help meant treatment, not cash. They hung up on me. That was my first real test, and I'd passed it. I'd held the boundary. But Sophie's problem kept growing. When legal credit dried up, she found illegal sources. She started borrowing from loan sharks, from underground gambling operations, from dangerous people. I didn't know how bad it had gotten until the phone call. It was a Tuesday morning, beautiful and clear. I was at my villa, having coffee on my porch and watching the waves roll in. I'd taken the day off work to handle some personal business. My phone rang at 9 a.m. It was my father. His voice was shaking. Clara, we need you to come to the house right now. It's an emergency. It's about Sophie. I felt that familiar sinking sensation in my chest. What did she do now? Just come. Please, we can't talk about this over the phone. I got dressed, got in my car, and drove the 2 hours to my parents' house. The whole drive, I tried to prepare myself for what I'd find. Was Sophie in jail? In the hospital? Had she finally been caught doing something illegal? The reality was somehow worse. When I arrived, both my parents were in the living room. My mother had clearly been crying for hours. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy. My father looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. His skin was gray, his hands were shaking. Sophie was there too, curled up on the couch in a ball. She looked small and terrified in a way I'd never seen before. Tell me what happened, I said. My father's voice was hoarse. Sophie owes money to some very bad people. How much? $500,000. I sat down. $500,000? How is that even possible? Sophie started crying. I borrowed $50,000 6 months ago. I thought I could win it back. I thought I'd double it and pay them back and still have money left over. But I lost it. So I borrowed more. And the interest kept adding up. And now they want $500,000 or they say they'll hurt me. These aren't regular creditors, my father said. These are criminals, violent criminals, threatened her. They gave her 48 hours to pay. My mother was sobbing. We have to help her, Clara. They'll hurt her. They might kill her. I looked at Sophie. Despite everything, despite years of bad decisions and lies, she looked genuinely terrified. For the first time in her life, she was facing consequences that my parents couldn't fix. Have you gone to the police? I asked. My father shook his head. We can't. Sophie signed documents, contracts. If we go to the police, they'll prosecute her for illegal gambling. And these people, they have connections. They told Sophie if she goes to the police, they'll hurt all of us, the whole family. I sat there, processing this information. My sister had gotten involved with organized crime. She owed $500,000 to loan sharks. And my parents wanted me to fix it. We have no liquid assets, my father said. Everything is in the trust. We can't pull out that kind of money quickly without liquidating investments, and that takes time we don't have. But you have the villa. It's worth $2 million. You could sell it fast, below market value, get cash in 48 hours. $500,000 would save Sophie's life, and you'd still have $1.5 million left. I understood then. They'd already worked it out. They'd already decided that my house, my sanctuary, my one asset that was truly mine, would be sacrificed to save Sophie. You want me to sell my home to pay gambling debts to criminals, I said slowly. To save your sister's life, my mother said. She made mistakes, but she's still your sister. She's still family. I looked at each of them. My father, who'd never respected me. My mother, who'd always chosen Sophie. My sister, who'd never faced a real consequence in 28 years. And I realized this was it. This was the moment my grandmother had warned me about. This was why she'd given me the villa. Why she'd made it separate from the trust. Why she'd told me I'd need a sanctuary. I stood up. No, I said. My father's face flushed red. What do you mean, no? I mean, no. I will not sell my house to pay for Sophie's gambling debts. I will not reward her addiction with a $500,000 bailout. I will not light my future on fire to save her from consequences she created. My mother stood up, screaming now. They will kill her. Do you understand that? Your sister will die. Then go to the police. Report the threats. Get protection. That's what law enforcement is for. We can't, Sophie said quietly. They'll hurt you too. They'll hurt Mom and Dad. They said everyone pays if I don't. Then you should have thought about that before you borrowed $500,000 from criminals, I said. My father stepped toward me. We gave you everything. Your education, your opportunities, your career. Everything you have is because of this family, and now you're going to let your sister die over a house? You gave me nothing, I said. Grandma paid for my education. Grandma gave me the house. Grandma set up the trust. Everything I have is because I worked for it, or because she believed in me. And you're asking me to destroy the one thing I have that's truly mine because Sophie made catastrophically bad choices, and you've spent her entire life protecting her from reality. I walked toward the door. The answer is no. It will always be number. Figure out another solution. I left. I got in my car, drove home, and didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt a strange, clear certainty that wasn't over. I was right. The next day, my father called again. His voice was different, calmer. He said they'd found another solution. They were going to take out a second mortgage on their house. It was risky, and they might lose their home if they couldn't make payments, but they'd do it to save Sophie. I almost believed him, but something felt off. The house is owned by the trust, I said. You can't mortgage it without my approval as trustee. There was a pause, just a heartbeat, but I heard it. Right, of course. We'll work something else out. Don't worry about it. He hung up. That pause told me everything. They were planning something that didn't my permission. I went into action immediately. First, I put fraud alerts on every account connected to my identity. Bank accounts, credit cards, investment accounts, everything. I called each institution and told them to flag any unusual activity and require verbal confirmation before processing anything significant. Second, I called my bank and had them freeze any ability to take out loans or lines of credit against my assets without in-person verification with 2 forms of ID. Third, and most importantly, I called the county clerk's office. I explained that I owned property and was concerned about potential fraud. I asked them to notify me immediately by email and phone if any documents were filed regarding my villa. Then I waited. It took them 36 hours. I was at my desk in my home office at the villa, reviewing contracts for a client, when my email alert pinged. It was from the county clerk's office. A deed transfer has been filed on your property located at 47 Seaside Drive. My heart rate didn't even increase. I felt perfectly calm. I opened the attachment. There it was. A deed transfer document showing the sale of my villa for $500,000. The buyer was listed as Coastal Acquisitions LC, an anodyne name that screamed Shell Corporation. And there was my signature at the bottom of the document. Except it wasn't my signature, it was close. Very close. Someone practiced. But I've signed my name thousands of times on the legal documents. I know every curve, every line, every quirk. The C in Clara had a specific loop I always made. This one was different. The tail on the final A was too short. The H in Hartwell had a particular slant. This one was too upright. It was a forgery. I scrolled up to see what authorization they'd used. There it was. A power of attorney document dated March 2019. I remembered that document. My mother had needed a minor surgical procedure, nothing serious, but she needed someone to make medical decisions if something went wrong during anesthesia. I'd signed a limited power of attorney that gave me authority to make healthcare decisions for her for 30 days following the procedure. It was limited, specific, and it had expired after 30 days, nearly 4 years ago. They'd taken that expired, limited power of attorney and used it to forge my signature and sell my house to a shell corporation for exactly the amount Sophie owed to loan sharks. I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a small smile. They'd done it. They'd actually committed fraud. They'd committed identity theft, forgery, and illegal appropriation of assets. They'd triggered every single provision of the bad actor forfeiture clause. I made 4 calls. The first was to the local police. I filed a report for identity theft and fraud. I sent them the forged deed transfer, the expired power of attorney, and my own identification documents. They opened an investigation immediately and assigned a detective. The second call was to my personal attorney. I instructed him to begin proceedings to void the fraudulent sale and to prepare a civil suit for damages. The third call was to my insurance company to report the fraud and ensure my property was protected. The fourth call was to Jonathan Myers, the family trust attorney. Jonathan, it's Clara. The bad actor clause has been triggered. There was a long silence. Then, are you certain? I'm certain. I'm sending you the police report, the forged documents, and the evidence right now. I heard him take a slow breath. All right. I'll need to verify everything independently. But if what you're saying is accurate, I'm legally obligated to enforce the clause. This will take a few hours. Take whatever time you need. But once you verify it, you need to notify all affected parties immediately as required by the trust documents. I understand, Clara. I need to ask you directly. Do you want to proceed with this? Once I make those calls, there's no going back. I understand completely. Proceed. All right. I'll call you when it's done. I hung up and looked at the clock. It was 2 p.m. I estimated Jonathan would need about 3 hours to contact the police, verify the fraud, review the trust documents, consult with his partners, and prepare the notifications. That meant he'd call my parents around 6 p.m. I spent those 3 hours working. I answered emails, reviewed contracts, made notes on cases. I kept myself busy and productive. But part of my mind was counting down the minutes. At 5 p.m., my phone rang. It was Jonathan. "It's confirmed," he said. His voice was serious, almost grave. "I've spoken with the detective handling your case. Your parents admitted to using the expired power of attorney. They admitted they knew it was expired. They admitted they forged your signature. The shell corporation was set up by the people Sophie owes money to. The sale was executed to transfer your property to them as payment for her debt. It's fraud, forgery, and illegal appropriation. Every element of the bad actor clause has been met." "Understood, Clara. I need you to understand what this means. Your parents will lose everything. Their home, their stipends, their cars, their entire inheritance. All of it will be liquidated and donated. They'll be left with nothing. And this applies to Sophie as well, since she was complicit in the fraud. All three of them will be removed as beneficiaries." "I understand. I have to ask you one more time. Do you want me to proceed?" I thought about every time they'd chosen Sophie over me, every time they treated my competence as a resource to be exploited rather than a daughter to be proud of. Every time they'd enabled her addiction and demanded I sacrifice myself. Every time they told me I was cruel for setting boundaries. Every time they made it clear that I didn't matter as much as she did. "Yes," I said. "Proceed." "All right, I'm calling them now." He hung up. I walked out onto my porch and sat in my favorite chair, the one that faces the ocean. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The waves rolled in with their eternal rhythm. Everything was peaceful. My phone started ringing at 6 p.m. First my father, then my mother, then my father again, then Sophie, then my mother again. Over and over, the calls came. I didn't answer any of them. I just sat and watched the sunset. Around 7 p.m., the voicemail started. My father's voice was shaking with rage. "What did you do? What the hell did you do?" That lawyer called and said, "We've lost everything. He said we committed fraud and triggered some clause, and now we have nothing. Call me back right now." "Right now, Clara." My mother was hysterical, barely coherent through her sobs. "Please, Clara, please, there's a mistake. Please call us. Please fix this. We're gonna lose our home. Please, you have to fix this." Sophie's message was just screaming and crying, words I couldn't even make out. Just raw emotion and rage. I deleted all the voicemails and blocked their numbers. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, Jonathan sent me a detailed summary of what had happened and what would happen next. His call to my parents had gone exactly as I'd imagined. He'd informed them that an emergency review of the trust had been conducted based on credible evidence of criminal activity. He'd explained that they had used an expired power of attorney to forge my signature and illegally sell my property. He'd told them this constituted felony-level fraud under both state law and the specific definitions in the trust documents. Then he'd explained the bad actor forfeiture clause. According to Jonathan's notes, my father had argued that it was an emergency, that Sophie's life was in danger, that they'd had no choice. Jonathan had explained that the clause made no exceptions for motivation, intent, or circumstances. A crime had been committed. The clause was triggered. My mother had asked what would happen to their shares of the trust. Jonathan had explained that their status as beneficiaries was immediately and irrevocably terminated. My father had asked if everything would go to me. And Jonathan had delivered the final blow. "No. Per the amendment you signed in 2019, all forfeited shares are to be liquidated and donated in full to the National Center for Problem Gambling. You'll receive nothing." According to Jonathan, there had been complete silence for about 5 seconds. Then screaming. Then the line went dead. The liquidation process began immediately. The house my parents lived in was put on the market. Since it was owned by the trust and they were no longer beneficiaries, they had 30 days to vacate. The property sold quickly for $1.8 million. The investment properties were sold, the cars were sold, the stocks were liquidated. Every single asset that had been allocated to my parents and Sophie was converted to cash. The process took 6 weeks. When it was complete, the National Center for Problem Gambling received a donation of $32 million, the largest single donation in the organization's 70-year history. My parents and Sophie were left with exactly what they'd earned on their own. Nothing. They tried to fight it, of course. They hired an attorney, though I never found out how they paid for it. Maybe they borrowed from friends, or maybe the attorney worked on contingency, hoping for a big payout. Their attorney reviewed the trust documents and gave them the news they didn't want to hear. They had no case. The bad actor forfeiture clause was legal, clearly written, properly executed, and voluntarily signed by all parties. The crime was documented, admitted, and unambiguous. There was no room for interpretation, no technicality to exploit, no legal avenue for reversal. They tried to come after me directly. They showed up at my office building 3 times. Each time, building security escorted them out and told them they'd be arrested for trespassing if they returned. They tried to get media attention. They reached out to local news stations with a story about a cruel daughter who'd stolen her family's inheritance. One station actually sent a reporter to investigate. The reporter dug into the details. When she found out about the forged signature, the illegal sale, Sophie's gambling addiction, and the loan sharks, the story changed. Instead of cruel daughter steals inheritance, it became family commits fraud, loses fortune. My parents looked like criminals, Sophie looked like an addict, and I looked like a victim who'd protected herself. The story aired once and disappeared. No other outlets picked it up. The fraudulent sale of my villa was voided within a month. The transaction was ruled invalid due to the forged signature. The shell corporation, Coastal Acquisitions LLC, was ordered to return the property. Of course, they'd already transferred the $500,000 to the loan sharks to pay Sophie's debt. That money was gone, disappeared into the criminal underworld. The shell company dissolved immediately after the ruling, the loan sharks vanished, and there was no one left to pursue for the money. But I got my house back, and that was what mattered. I also filed a civil suit against my parents for damages, emotional distress, legal fees, and punitive damages. The court ruled in my favor. The judgment was for $1.3 million. My parents couldn't pay, obviously. They had nothing. So, the judgment sits on their record permanently, a legal scar that will follow them for the rest of their lives. It destroyed their credit. They can't buy a house, can't get a car loan, can't even rent a decent apartment without a cosigner. I haven't spoken to any of them since the day I walked out of their house and said no. But I've heard things through mutual acquaintances, distant relatives, and people who know the story. My parents moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town. For the first time in their adult lives, they had to get real jobs. My father, who'd never done manual labor in his life, got a job at a hardware store making $15 an hour. My mother does data entry from home for slightly more. Sophie lives with them. She couldn't afford her own place on a waitress salary. I heard she's working at a chain restaurant, living paycheck to paycheck. I don't know if she's still gambling. I don't know if she got help. I don't know if she's learned anything from what happened. And I don't care. People ask me if I feel guilty. Extended family members, old friends who knew us growing up, even some colleagues who know the story. They ask how I could do that to my own parents, my own sister. They say, family is supposed to forgive. They say, I went too far. They say, the punishment didn't fit the crime. But they're wrong. It wasn't punishment. It was consequences. My parents spent their entire lives running from consequences. They protected Sophie from consequences. They threw money at every problem, smoothed over every mistake, enabled every destructive behavior, and pretended that love meant never letting someone feel pain. But consequences are how we learn. Consequences are what separate adults from children. Consequences are what protect innocent people from destructive people. They didn't just make a mistake. They committed multiple felonies. They stole from me. They forged my signature. They illegally sold my home without my knowledge or permission. They did all of this to cover a debt that wasn't theirs, for an addiction they'd enabled, in service of a daughter they'd ruined with their weakness. And they thought there would be no price to pay. They thought I'd just accept it, or maybe be angry for a while, and eventually forgive them. They thought family meant I'd let them destroy me to save themselves. They were wrong. The bad actor clause wasn't a trap I set to hurt them. It was a boundary I established to protect myself and protect my grandmother's legacy. It was a clear line that said, this far and no further. If you cross this line, there will be consequences. Real, permanent, and devastating consequences. They chose to cross it. I didn't destroy my family. They destroyed themselves. I just refused to go down with them. I still live in my villa. I still practice law. I've actually expanded my practice. I now specialize in estate planning, trust protection, and family asset protection. I help other people in situations like mine, people with troubled family members who might harm them financially. And I always include bad actor clauses in trusts I draft. I've also used some of the remaining trust assets, the portion that was always allocated to me, to establish a scholarship fund. It provides full-ride scholarships to students pursuing degrees in addiction counseling, psychology, and social work. It's named after my grandmother. It's my way of doing something productive with a legacy that almost got swallowed by addiction and enabling. Sometimes I sit on my porch and watch the waves and think about everything that happened. I think about my grandmother and how she saw all of this coming. I think about the choice she made to put me in charge, to trust me with her life's work. I think about whether she'd be proud or horrified by what I did. I think she'd be proud. She told me once, near the end of her life, that the worst thing you can do for someone you love is protect them from reality. She said that real love is tough love. Real love is letting someone fall so they can learn to stand on their own. Real love is enforcing boundaries and consequences even when it hurts. My parents never learned that lesson. They confused enabling with love, protection with support, and sacrifice with family loyalty. And because they never learned it, they destroyed Sophie. They turned her into someone who believed the world would always save her, who never had to face the results of her choices, who thought love meant never being held responsible. And then they tried to do the same thing to me. They tried to make me the eternal fixer, the sacrifice, the daughter who sets herself on fire to keep everyone else warm. But I said no. And that no cost them everything. I don't regret it, not for a second. I sleep well at night, my conscience is clear, I'm happy, successful, and at peace. Some people call that cold. I call it healthy. My parents gambled with my life, my security, and my future. They bet that I'd choose their version of family over my own well-being. They bet that I'd let them commit crimes against me without facing consequences. They lost. And just like every gambling loss Sophie ever took, this one was their choice. They placed the bet. They rolled the dice. They drew the cards. Nobody forced them to forge my signature. Nobody made them sell my house illegally. Nobody caused the situation except them. I just made sure that when they made those choices, there were real consequences. That's not revenge. That's justice. The trust is secure now. My grandmother's legacy is protected. The money she spent decades building is being used for good, scholarships, charitable work, and supporting me as I help others protect themselves from similar situations. And the one person she trusted to protect it all is the only one left standing. I set a legal trap for my family, and they walked right into it. Was this cold, calculated revenge, or the only way to get justice? Let me know what you think in the comments below.